The Provoke Podcast, brought to you by Provoke Media and produced by the international broadcast specialist Marketeers.
Hello, and welcome to the Provoke Podcast. I am Diana Marzalek. I am here with Provoke Media, and we have a guest today with Valarie De La Garza, who is the CEO of Fenton Communications. Welcome.
Oh, good morning, Diana. I couldn't be more excited to be with you this morning.
We're very happy to have you, or getting you into our mix here. So it's good. And maybe you could tell us a little bit about yourself just to start. You bring a little bit of a different background than what we commonly see in our industry, especially at the CEO level. So please let us, fill us in briefly on where you come from, and we'll go from there.
Well, great. Well, I am a proud 30-year veteran of strategic communications, but you're right. I have had a very interesting path that's I'd love to talk about, not necessarily a straight line. Like many people, I accidentally fell into public relations as a college student on the verge of graduating. There I was, 21, 22 years old, trying to figure out what the heck I was going to do with my life. I had been a journalist for 4 years. So of course, I thought that was the way. I was the editor-in-chief of the Daily Bruin. And so, of course, there were all these expectations that I should, and for myself even, that I should be a print journalist. And then I started going on the interviews and thinking about it and wondering what my life would be like and thinking, am I a reporter? Is that for me? And I was really conflicted. And it was my journalism advisor at the Daily Bruin at the time that said, you should try something new, something that is emerging, and that is Latino public relations. And I thought, oh my gosh, PR, public relations, that's not something I'm going to do. That's the other side.
And I'm going to interrupt you for one moment. We have not established the fact that you are, in fact, LatinX, right?
Yes, I am.
Doing Latino public relations made sense at that time.
It absolutely did. So I am, fun fact, I'm 11th generation American.
Really?
Yes. And what that means is that my family on my father's side traces our lineage back 11 generations in Texas. Huh. And so what we like to say is, so I would say I'm a Tejana, although I didn't grow up in Texas. The border moved, we didn't move.
Right. Interesting. So what date does that go back to? Do you know? Like what?
Gosh. Yeah, the late 1700s.
Amazing.
Yeah. And that's a whole other story of how I found out.
That's our next podcast. That's our sequel.
Yeah, I was at a new business pitch, and someone came up to me with the same last name and said, I think we are related. And sure enough, we were. His family had done a whole genealogical study. And there it was. So that's another conversation.
But yeah, 11 generations into it, you still grew up in a Latino neighborhood, right? And yes, you were the first
absolutely
in your family to go to college, correct? So
exactly. So the first to go to college, and on my mother's side, our family is would be considered second generation from Mexico.
Okay.
So truly Latina, so new to public relations, but as a Latina, that was really interesting to hear about something that was specific to my community. And in the 90s at this time, and it was in the early 90s, there was a emergence in public relations around ethnic community public relations and communications, strategic communications that were serving the Black, Latino, Asian American, Pacific Islander communities. And so I worked as an intern for one of the first companies called Coronado Communications in Los Angeles. And it opened my eyes to something new that I could do as a communicator, something new that I could also do to serve my community and engage my community. So it was fascinating to me. So that's really where I began that journey. And so since then, over these 30 years, I worked for two of these Latino public relations firms where I learned so much about the diversity of my own community nationwide. And then I worked for a global firm, Manny Selvage and Lee, and then went on to work for a regional firm. And then I had my own consultancy for 9 years. But what kept drawing me back to what I felt was my core of my purpose, was doing work that impacted the community, that was really about social good. And so I went in-house. I thought that's something new I should try. I went to the California Community Foundation for a few years to oversee marketing and communications. And it's there that I met Fenton. That's where I was introduced to Fenton. I did not know about the firm and its incredible legacy. It's been around, we're in our 41st year. And I really felt like I missed my people. And I know that the listeners of this podcast, you're my people who are interested in, on the agency level, at least, the diversity of clients, of the types of work that we do, that we see, the fast-paced nature of things, the satisfaction of feeling like your strategy connected with audiences and moved a needle. And so I joined Fenton, and I've been at the firm for 6 years. I oversaw 2 of our offices on the West Coast before I was asked to join as the CEO to this amazing firm. And I am proud to be the first Latina and the first woman to serve in this role in the agency's history.
That's wonderful. And among the few in the industry beyond the agency, correct? I mean, thinking of Latina women in the CEO seat in agencies, are you among the few? Are you it?
Yeah, I would say so. What we know is I would love to say that as proud as I am, I wish I was not one of the only.
Mm-hmm.
What we know is that from what we see in statistics is that the national average at communications firms of people of color in the C-suite is 7%, and I believe it's half of that as women of color. And then we know that across the board of agencies, I mean, unfortunately, I would love to say that in 30 years from when I first started out, things have changed, and sadly, and they have not. We know that it's seen its ebb and flow, but it's really at a moment that is really quite alarming. At Fenton, more than half of our staff are people of color, and more than 2/3 identify as women. And I am proud that more than half of our leaders at Fenton are people of color. So for us, it's not just about the numbers across the agency, and we're extremely proud of that, but also in the leadership. And I think that that's really something that we've worked very hard at achieving. It's not something that comes overnight. It's something that you have intentionality around.
Is that something that also stems from the fact that Fenton is a social impact firm, and that the diversity and the diversity of the clients, and so sort of social awareness is part and parcel of the agency and has been from the get-go? Or are you not playing the same catch-up game, but doing the same catch-up that a lot of firms are having to do right now?
Sure. Well, I think that the subjects that you just touched on, the things that we do, social change, racial equity, social justice in general, does attract, I think, perhaps a more diverse base, workforce. Having said that, I think that, and my story is I think reflective of that, public relations, strategic communications is not necessarily a natural field for people of color to fall into and to know about. I mean, I'll sit around the Thanksgiving table, as many I'm sure of your listeners do, and people say, "What do you do?" Your family will say, "What is that? I don't know." "Oh, advertising. Okay, I think I understand that." So because it's not something natural, that's not necessarily widely known as other professions, we do have to have intentionality. And I think what's been different for us at Fenton is it's one thing to have the value, it's another thing to have a plan that lives those values. So for us, where a lot of companies, and I think, I understand why they have appointed and look for a DEI officer or one person to be responsible for increasing the diverse talent pool. For us, we do not believe that diversity and equity and inclusion is the responsibility of one person. So rather than hiring a solitary person, we engaged our agency across the board. We created a task force that includes staff members at all levels who freely share ideas, and we each have a stake in the success of our collective efforts. We put together a blueprint that's not just about our values, because that's that's one thing to say this is what we value, and I think the industry values diversity. But how do we actualize that? How do we put that into place? How do we keep ourselves honest and on track? How do we think about practices that are going to be transformative to making sure that we attract diverse candidates, that we retain them, and that also we help move them up, so that it's not, and what you see many times at firms is that you'll see a high concentration of people of color at perhaps the core staff level or in the middle, and for us it's really about the entire agency, across the board.
But what are you doing that, I don't want to say that other agencies aren't doing, but
Sure.
Agencies are struggling, right? So why? What is it? How are you achieving that success that maybe some of our well-intentioned colleagues are not?
Right. Well, as I mentioned, we have a roadmap that keeps us on track. But part of what we have done is, and this has been something that in the industry, there's been a lot of discussion around, and we are really open to encouraging candidates with non-traditional backgrounds. So for us, and of course, and you alluded to this earlier, I think because we are in social change, social justice as the types of clients that we attract, we bring people who have activism or advocacy as a mindset. So maybe they come from a nonprofit, maybe they are journalists. Not that isn't unusual across the industry, but for us, we see quite a few journalists. We have people who have legal backgrounds, people who have come from government, philanthropy. I mentioned that I work for the California Community Foundation on staff. Now I would say we have quite a few folks who work for foundations in the comms department. And so I think that's casting that wider net has been quite fruitful for us. Also, we've eliminated the requirement of a college degree on our job descriptions so that we can be much more open to people of all backgrounds. We believe all experience is important. And so for us, those have been ways that we feel have really borne fruit. And I think the other thing too is that we feel that part of the recruitment, we've been very, very diligent about lived-in experiences. Lived-in experience is so important. In the end, our clients are change makers. The communities that they serve are often marginalized, people who are underrepresented. And I think we talk so much about that in our recruitment that really connects with a much deeper, wider, more diverse candidate base.
Something that you mentioned that is mentioned frequently is this topic of, well, you mentioned that public relations is not sort of the natural or known profession for a lot of communities of colors. But you found PR, right? I mean, somehow you found it and you succeeded. So was that the luck of having somebody mention it to you? I mean, you did it. So what are we going to do to get the students, the kids, the young people into the field?
Right. Well, I think that I was introduced to it, and I was introduced to it in a way that I was able to feel that I was in a supportive, safe environment around people who look like me. And I have been at agencies that I love, where I have been the only. And it is a very lonely place where you feel that you are different in so many ways. And so I always say diversity attracts diversity. And I am very humbled, and I do not take for granted that I am an ambassador for Fenton. Many of our core staff have told me that I am the first person that they have connected with in their professional journey that has been a woman of color, has been a Latina, even amongst some of our more senior staff. And so that helps. Back to sort of how I found it, but when I went to the first agency that I worked for, because there were people around me with that, similar background, that actually was really engaging for me. That was really empowering. And I know that when we talk with our staff, that's really something that's very powerful for them, and they are ambassadors. They actually, I talked about recruitment, and we have an incredible recruiter in Laura Gomez, but we have to remember that our talent, our staff, they are our ambassadors. And so they're excited about the work that they are doing. They're excited about the environment that we have fostered. We have affinity groups for our Latino, Latinx, Black, Asian, American Pacific Islander, our LGBTQ, and women, and that is we've heard so much about from our talent about how that's so meaningful to them and so unusual. Now we do see that more and more at other companies, but it's really worked for us. It's really because it's brought pride and it's brought empowerment, and it's helped with that ambassadorship, if you will.
You mentioned you had an ambassadorship for Fenton, but you're to some degree, maybe perhaps an unintended or unwanted ambassador in the industry, correct? I mean, is that weighty? Is that something you want?
I will tell you, I did not realize that until I really took the job. I recently was in a room with about 12 other peers. They were all at the, you name the firms, and they were all CEOs, and I was the only. Mm-hmm. And that moment, I will tell you, had a lot of weight to it, because it's one thing to see the numbers and it's one thing to know intellectually, but I hadn't been the quote only in a long time. Mm-hmm. And because I've been the agency for a while, and then I had my own consultancy. Anyway, and then I was like, wow. So yes, it has, but I will say it's weighty, but at the same time, I think it's important. And I do feel that I use my voice. I have had many firms call and talk to me and say, what is the secret sauce? What is it that you're doing that we are not doing? Because I don't, certainly there is a great intention. There are lots of initiatives. And so we've talked about it. And so I do feel a great responsibility, more than I ever have before. I didn't realize that would happen. And I think it's a lot of it is about following through and not giving up and not being resigned to it and saying, we can't quote find them, find us. We're here. We just are in places that you may not necessarily have looked. And that is going to take intention. That's going to take investment. But I'm here to prove to you that it's doable. Up until 2 years ago, we had 50 people. Now we have 110. And look at our diversity.
Right.
So what our plan, our blueprint is indeed working.
Interesting. Interesting. You started at, like you said, Latino marketing firms. So you were doing multicultural marketing, or however we term it, back 30 years ago. And now that is, again, agencies stressing multicultural marketing, bringing people on. How have you seen, what was it then and what's it like now? I mean, how has that sort of specialty evolved or not evolved?
Sure. I think that what I have seen is then it was very nice to have. Isn't that wonderful this is so great. This is a niche. And what I have seen is the demand, and rightfully so, a recognition from clients that it has to be, it's not a nice to have. It has to be, and it has to be authentic. And that's where the diverse staff lived in experiences really come through. So what I tell people is my grandparents were domestic workers. They were janitors, seamstresses, farm workers. My grandfather worked in a junkyard. I'm the first person in my family to earn a college degree. I grew up in a place where your zip code greatly influenced your economic success. I know what it's like to face prejudice. This is the lived-in experience that I bring to my job every day, and that I'm able to reflect on when I'm helping a client figure out the right strategy to connect and engage with their audiences. And so I have found that today versus then, it was nice. That's what this is what these smaller firms do, or our division, as an example. There were lots of divisions, and now you're seeing, I think, a shift where we've got to figure it out, and it's not just multicultural, multilingual, and it's not always easy to do. But I do feel that I appreciate that clients have a demand for the greater authenticity around it.
Which is great. And as you said, it is complex. You're looking, this is a complex population, multilingual, multi-ethnic. It's big.
Well, even there's diversity within the diversity. I shared my own background. Many people have said to me, oh, well, am I an immigrant? Come from an immigrant background, because that's I think a lot of people, it's their go-to. And certainly the immigrant experience in the Latinx Latino community is important and strong and rich and diverse. But that's not every experience. There are experiences that I have that are I grew up in a house, in a family where I'd heard Spanish and I heard English. But as I mentioned, we've been here for generations. There's been a retention of culture, and so connecting with me, someone of my generation or my background is very different than connecting with someone who's just been here for a few years, or who is as I said, newly arrived, or there's just so much richness within diversity, so it's quite complex.
Sounds great. Sounds hard. And we haven't even touched your social impact work. Before we go, I do want to ask you, your numbers said have doubled in terms of staff. I'm assuming that reflects a growth in your workload and clients. Are you seeing the result of more companies wanting to get into the social impact work? What are you seeing in that level?
Yeah, I think that, the last, since 2020, or even beyond, have been in the progressive world, a time of great battle, of great complexity. And so, we have clients across philanthropy, government, nonprofits that are all fighting so many battles, that are advocating for so many causes in the area of social justice. And we have been blessed with clients that come back to us as partners who need, we talked about a complex world, and these are complex issues. And so I would say that what we have seen is just an uptick in so many clients who have said, you know what, we need to keep going. We need to do things differently. We have been around for a long time, for 40 years, but I think these last few years in particular, the vexing issues that we faced as it relates to voter suppression, certainly what we've seen, the battles fought in reproductive rights. I can go on and on with racial reckoning. So many of these highly consequential. We're seeing what we continue to see in gun violence. I can go on and on. Clients need partners who understand these issues. Clients need partners who have a talent base, who understand these issues from their own perspective. And so I think that we have borne that that fruit because of that, complexity. And this is our specialty. This is what we do. We don't feel like we are of service to our clients, but we also feel that their mission, we take it on as our own. We are partners in that fight. It's not enough for us to say, that's wonderful, we helped you move the needle. What we get really excited about is when we have clients like our gun violence prevention PAC out of Illinois, where we're able to help them pass legislation that changes lives in the area of policy. So, in the areas, I can go on and on, in so many areas. So I think that we continue to see success and traction. And so it's been very good for that growth over these last 2 years in particular. And we say the more growth that we have, the more good we can do with our clients in changing lives and creating a better and more just and equitable world.
Sounds like a good mission. I appreciate all that work that you do and your personal success, and appreciate the time you spent talking to us.
Thank you so much, Diana.
You've been listening to the Provoke podcast, brought to you by Provoke Media and produced by the international broadcast specialist Marketeers.